Alright, hello. So I wanted to make a quick little video just in case somebody was absent or if I already went over this with a big group of kids and I just had a couple people coming in at a time. But this is just kind of the quick, simple thing that I always go over with students with ceramics. Whenever we get started with things, just the basics, 3 different ways to build, and then our different tools, how to wedge, and then how to put everything away. So whenever you're getting started, there's a couple materials that you'll need. These are rollers that are taped together, and this helps whenever you're creating a slab of clay, which is what we'll be using probably the most in this class. So you'll need those. Just a big wooden roller. This can be used, again, to roll a slab. Those will be used together. This is called a fettling knife. It's not super duper sharp, but it's really good for cutting clay. And then I have just a normal fork for using for scratch and slip. And then there's a couple other materials over there. There is a circle kind of biscuit sponges, which are used to add water and smooth out clay. And then there's also different types of loop tools. So there's smaller loop tools and larger loop tools. These could be used for whenever we throw pottery, but these could also be used for hand building as well. If there's a material that needs cut away, these are really good for carving. So there's a whole bunch of those in the back. And then I have a handful of different types of modeling tools too. I just grabbed one. These are good for smoothing edges or adding any little details if you wanted like special characteristics onto a cup or something with clay. And then everybody will get a blue tray, which hopefully you could share with the partner. You could probably fit 2 projects on it at a time. The tray will be covered by a garbage bag, just so then that way we could keep it humid, and then any of the projects won't dry out too fast, so I like to store them on this. And then I definitely recommend having a canvas cloth in between you and the table, because if you were to build directly onto the table, I've had students in the past roll slabs out and then they get stuck to the table. So the canvas cloth not only helps it not get stuck to the table, but it also takes some of the moisture away. So if you ever get a piece of clay that's too kind of full of water, or it's kind of waterlogged if you added too much water the night before, this is a really good way to help to dry the clay off. So these are available back on the clay shelf as well. We have all of our tools that we need for this project. I wanted to go into the basics of getting started. So it doesn't matter what you're making, you have to start by wedging your clay first. And of course, the pre-planning before it is important as well, especially if we're creating mugs, if we're doing a disguised clay container. I want to make sure everybody has a good idea of where they're going with that process first. But once you get your clay and you're ready to go, you'll begin by wedging your clay. So what wedging is basically kneading clay, and you kind of pick it up, press it down, pick it up, press it down. And this helps to get out the air bubbles from the clay. It also helps to take some of the moisture out of it as well. I don't necessarily have a magic number that I count to get all the air bubbles out. There are a couple ways that you could see the different, like if there's any air bubbles left in it as you're working. If you wanted to take, I have a wire cutter tool in the back. If you wanted to take that, cut it in half, and you could check if there's air bubbles that way. But I normally wedge until I count to about 40 or 50, and it seems like for the most part you're okay. There are ways that you could clean out the air bubbles or pop the air bubbles as you're working, but rolling the slab, you'll definitely be able to tell. But you just want to make sure you wedge it really, really well. Whenever you're working on your project, if there are any air bubbles in it as you're working, if you're working on it, it's fine, but once it's put into the kiln, those air bubbles cause, as they heat up, they expand. And whenever they expand too much, it could cause not only your project to blow up, but possibly projects that are beside it as well. So it's super important to start off with that. So now that I feel like I'm good with my wedging, I want to start to roll a slab. And if you're going to start to roll a slab with something like this, it would be really difficult. So a couple things that helped me is that I just kind of take the clay and bop it into almost like a cube at first, or like a clay slab, like an old clay slab for writing or something. And I would bop it into that shape first, and then when I get something that kind of resembles a cube, I'm going to take my hand and start to press down on that. This is going to make the slab rolling process way easier. If you have old pieces of clay that kind of got on there from the canvas cloth, you could just pick those out at this point. Okay, so now I have something that'll be way easier to roll out. I'm going to take these little pieces here, so these taped together rollers, they're kind of tapered in. I don't know if you could really see that, but they're tapered in at a point, so I'm going to actually put that point on the inside, because that can affect how wide the slab is. I'm going to take my bigger wooden roller, and I'm just going to use that. Whenever you're rolling this out, try to keep even pressure if you can. If you could kind of tell if a slab's uneven, if somebody's going to like push down here and then just pull back, you could kind of see divots. So try your best to keep it even as you're rolling. Now for your final slab, you don't want anything that's thicker than about a ½ inch. I think that ½ inch thickness could be a little bit too wide, especially if you're making a cup or something. It would be something that would be uncomfortable to drink out of. But also, if it's any thicker than ½ inch, it could potentially blow up in the kiln because the outside might feel dry, but the inside might still have moisture. So it's a good idea to use the rollers as a guide, because it should create something that is the correct thickness. But I even like to move the rollers out of the way and continue to roll it a little bit more. It doesn't have to be super duper thin. It definitely needs to have some substance to it, but something like that would be a little bit easier to use, and then it gives you a little bit of extra slab to work with as well. Okay, so now that I have my slab rolled out, you could, if you wanted to, all depending on your design, you could have a paper template that you create ahead of time, all depending on the project. You could place that paper template on top. So for instance, if this was my paper template, I could put it on top of my slab and cut around it. For right now, I don't have a paper template to use, so I'm actually just going to cut off the extra edges. So I'm just going to go through, put the sharp side down, and cut off all the uneven edges. But I like to keep these because you could use them as potentially handles for a cup later, or if you have any extra little details that you need to carve out and cut, you already have a pre-rolled slab, so it might be easier to keep that. I'm going to cut off these half moon shapes. And then you have a slab rolled out. All depending on your template, you may need to use 2 to 3 balls of clay in order to get something that's workable or usable. And then whenever you're done with your slab, if you're still not happy with the thickness or how long it is, you could go ahead back in if you need to, just gently kind of create your slab or roll it out a little bit more. Alright, so now we have our slab all done. I just wanted to show you a quick, easy way to put it together. So I had a lot of students in the past, they'll create a slab, and then if they wanted to make a cup or some type of cylindrical shape, they would try their best to kind of mush these around and try to make the seams fit, but they always ended up with something that didn't resemble, it'd kind of be a little wonkadoodle. And then they would have trouble with this seam a lot. This seam might tend to like tear open. So one thing that really helps to put these pieces together is to overlap the two shapes a little bit on the outside. And then you'll take your fettling knife And where these overlap, you're going to cut it at an angle. It doesn't matter if it's this way or this way, just as long as they're both kind of going the same way. Just hold it and carefully cut it the whole way down. Get rid of those. And then what you're left with is actually a 45-degree angle, which is way easier to put together, and it leaves a stronger seam. So now that I have that cut, I'll take my fork, scratch along the sides. And you really want to make sure you kind of mar up the surface. It'll help it stick together a little bit better. And then you're going to take slip. And slip, this is kind of gross, but what slip is basically clay mixed with water. This is kind of like the glue that's going to hold it together. So you're going to take some of that slip, and I'd put it on both of the sides using the fork, or if you want to use the fettling knife, that's fine too. And then you're going to carefully attach these together. And this goes for anything that you want to attach using clay. You would always make sure you scratch both surfaces, and then you would apply the slip and push them together. You don't want to push it to a point where you kind of mess up the shape that you have, but you also want to make sure that it's enough that the slip's kind of coming out of the side a little bit, and you can use your fettling knife and just smooth the seam. That'll help to make it a little bit stronger. And I would also recommend smoothing the seam on the inside as well. I don't know if you can really see that, but I would recommend smoothing the seam on the inside as well. And again, the fettling knife is a really good tool to use to kind of smooth those seams out. So we create a nice cylinder shape with that. Now, if you did want to make a cup and it was something like this, you wanted a tall normal cup, you could roll out another slab of clay and just trace around the bottom and cut it out, and that would make an easy bottom for you. The next way of working with clay would be what's called coil building. And all coil building is taking a piece of clay and making, like what my elementary school kids would say, making little snakes. And again, I would roll them out on a canvas cloth or something where it could help to take some of the moisture out. And then you'll want to make sure that you have a slab base to build off of. So if you did want to make like a rounded form and you wanted to use this, I would just cut it into the shape that you want, which I actually might use this as my tracer. I'm going to trace around that. And then you could carve out your shape. Something that resembles a circle. There you go. And then you'll take those coils and you could use those to build up. So slab building is good for things that are straighter, or you wanted to build a lot of surface area fast. Coil building is good for something that's more flared out. If you had a shape that kind of swells and gets a little smaller, coil building would be the way to go for that. So whenever you have your coil built, you're going to use your fork, scratch the surface that you want it to be attached to. Also scratch the coil, add a little bit of slip, and then you're just going to attach this onto your base. And what I like to do for the ends is I like to kind of push them down so it makes almost like a ramp. So the next time, if you just need, like for me, I just need a little piece of a coil. So whenever I go to add the coil, I could just press that down and kind of make it one smooth shape. So that's just kind of an easy way to get, forgot to scratch this up. That's kind of an easy way to get that to be smooth without having to make any special coils or do anything weird. And you can build them up as high or as low as you want, whatever you need. Once you get enough coils on there, then you could start the smoothing out process. So once I attach this one, you'll see that as you coil build, there's going to be some seams that start to form as you're building. And an easy way to get rid of those seams is to take a tool like this wooden modeling tool and work either top down or bottom up, whatever has the most clay, and you could use that to smooth the clay down. That helps to get rid of those coils, but it also helps to smooth the clay out and also to keep it a little bit stronger as well. And you do it on the inside as well as the outside. Just make sure that you have a hand or something on it to hold it into place, so as you're pressing this clay out or moving it around, that you aren't making it fall apart as you go. So that's just another quick way to build with clay. So we have slab building here, coil building here. And then the very last way of building is what's called a pinch pot construction method. Let me grab some of this clay here. So what you'll do is you'll start off with like a wedged ball of clay. You could go ahead and roll it if you need to smooth out some of the bumps. And what you'll do is you'll take your thumb, press it into the clay, and then you'll use your hands to kind of slowly pinch that out into what will resemble a bowl shape. Now, as you're pinching, you want to try your best to keep it consistent. So for instance, you could kind of tell this side's a little bit thinner than these sides are a little bit thicker. So I might want to pinch a little bit more on the thicker sides to get it to match the thinner side. And you could always add coils later if something isn't right for you. With pinch pot construction, you need to make sure that you don't leave the wall thickness too thick. Remember, a ½ an inch is probably the max. I would definitely recommend something thinner than that for it to survive the kiln. Now, if you're starting to create your pinch pot and you're happy with it, one way that you could smooth out the top is as those little cracks are forming. So your hand kind of creates a perfect little C. So you could collar it and use your finger to smooth it out, or if you have a damp sponge, you could smooth it out that way as well. Or if maybe the one side's lower than the other and the others are taller, you could just lightly bop it on the table. That'll help to smooth everything out, and then you could pinch it back into shape. So those are the 3 different ways that you could use clay to build whatever you need, whether it be a cup or a disguised clay container. These are the simple methods of doing that. Now, whenever you are done working for the day and it is cleanup time, I try my best to give everybody a 10-minute warning, but sometimes time escapes me, especially if I'm helping people out. Your extra scrap clay, you'll keep that. I have extra like Martin's bags, or any little plastic bag will do. You could give it a couple of sprays. You don't need a lot. And you're just going to kind of tightly seal that up. So then that way you could use the clay in the future. You could put that onto your tray. I would not recommend putting your canvas cloth on your tray unless you're trying to purposely dry out your project. If you leave this cloth on there, it'll just pull all the moisture from whatever's touching the canvas cloth, and it causes it to grow mold, but it also will dry out your project. Another thing that you could do to keep your projects so then that way they stay the next day is to take paper towels, run them under a little bit of water, and squeeze out most of the water and drape the paper towels over top of your project, so then that way it maintains that moisture and you're able to work with it the next day. So I would definitely wrap all these in damp paper towels, and then you'll just cover them. And then I always like to take the edge of the garbage bag and just tuck it under. If you'd like to put a piece of masking tape with your name or your partner's name on it, that is more than fine, and these will be stored wherever I designate your class to store all of your items. You can, if you're worried about this getting dried out, or if your project is getting a little too dried out, you could open this up and spray it with a little bit of water, but for the most part, I wouldn't recommend kind of waterlogging everything. You do want your project to slowly dry out as you're going, but that is all that I have. Good luck.